I was told that you're a Guardian reader, Geddy. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
I mean, I'm actually freelance, so I've got no particular loyalty, but it's nice to be speaking to you for these guys in particular. So yeah, it's a reader interview, so I have had no say in the questions. You're a very popular man. There's a lot of questions uh, sent your
Uh-oh.
way. There's about 200 questions, and I've whittled it down to about 20. So
Okay,
um, try and get through as many as we can, I guess. And I would
sure.
say don't be worried about giving short answers because there's way more to get through. um,
All right. I'll try.
um,
Not known for being brief, so I'll do my best to
yeah, whatever feels right if you want to elaborate on something or not. So
sure.
yeah,
I'm
the
just
first the
kind of
first question is from a Bertram, and he says you and Alex had already been friends for years when Neil joined Rush in 1974. How did you succeed in making him feel like an equal part of the band rather than just the drummer in your band?
okay, great. That's a good question. When Neil first joined the band, we immediately discovered we had a lot in common. Our sense of humor. He loved Monty Python's Flying Circus, for example, and so did we. He loved The Lord of the Rings, and so did we. And a lot of the bands that we liked were very similar. He was big into Cream, and
Yeah,
Ginger Baker was one of his favorite drummers. And so our commonality stood us in good stead when just a mere 2 weeks later we were out on the road at our first American tour, which was quite overwhelming. So I think the fact that we were all experiencing this wonderful new experience and feeling like these shy Canadians suddenly thrust into a big American touring vibe, I think that bonded us really. It
yeah,
gave us a commonality, and it really helped smooth over the new guy in the band. But we always joked for 40 years that he was still the new guy.
yeah. It's at the very end. Yeah. And next question is from Distant Early Blooper. And they ask, what was the funniest experience you ever had on the road with Rush?
The funniest experience. Oh my God. That's a tough one because there's so many crazy moments to choose from. Oh God. There's one story I tell in my memoir about the night that Alex, this was in the UK, so this kind of relates
Yeah.
the UK audience. We were in Manchester and we had a 2 night gig there. And after the first night, we went back to the bar in our hotel. And Alex had been under a little bit of strain because he had had a son the year before, and I think he was feeling very homesick to be with his kid. And so he challenged our 6'11" stage manager to a cognac drinking contest. Uh, and once it that after about 12 shots of cognac, he broke a glass in the bar, and so our road manager and uh, touring manager both escorted him to his room, but he would not be contained. And when we went to the elevator to go to say goodnight for the evening, and the elevator doors opened, out he came on a room service cart, you know, flying out into the bar. And anyway, chaos ensued for the next couple of hours, but that was, I think, one of the funniest evenings that we
Yeah.
experienced.
No, that's a great answer. And the next question is about Neil as well. And Dr. Spankle asks, the standard of music and lyrics in Rush was always very high, but did Neil ever present you with lyrics that made you think, wow, you've outdone yourself here?
Yeah, a number of times. The idea of working with Neil on lyrics was an evolution of a partnership. And in the early days, we were very hesitant to criticize anything he wrote because he was willing to do that job that we didn't want to do. But as time went on, I became kind of his trusted sounding board. And there were many songs, for example, Bravado and The Garden and even Dreamline, that when they were first presented felt so relatable that the songs almost wrote themselves around those lyrics.
Yeah. Okay. And Eternal Skeptic says, when punk arrived, I remember the sheer vitriol from most music journalists towards prog rock, and Rush seemed to be a particular target. How do you remember this period, and how do you view it now?
Well, I remember it quite fondly because we were mixing an album in London at the time that the Sex Pistols were on the TV, and the whole punk thing was kind of exploding, anarchy in the UK. And it was really fascinating to watch. And at the same time, the 3-chord, 4-chord style of these bands instantly made us seem like Beethoven by comparison.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the punk movement legitimized our playing ability and our more complex structures. So I was all in favor of that.
Yeah. Jameson says, I'm a bass player of intermediate ability and I would like to get to the next level. What single piece of advice would you give me?
Oh man, that is just so hard to say.
It is very, very broad question.
You know, everybody's different, but I think redundancy and repetitive, repetitive, find riffs that are hard to play and just keep playing them and keep challenge yourself. Keep looking at the fingerboard for those parts of the fingerboard that seem like unknown spaces to you, and then get to know them. I found it very helpful to listen to players of differing styles, even if I wasn't keen on the style they were playing. Trying to mimic their style pushed me to know parts of the fingerboard better, and that really helped contribute to being a better player.
BCDC dude says, I want to ask about the band's sense of humor. How did Rush get involved with South Park and the film I Love You Man?
Okay, good question. When we first started, we always had a good sense of humor, but for some reason, I guess it was youth and just lack of confidence, we kept that humor to ourselves. But as time went on and we went through many different phases, and some of them some of these phases were not really happy times. By 2002, we had just decided that it was okay to be ourselves, whether it was backstage or on stage. So the South Park thing just happened because, Matt, and in particular of the two, was a huge Rush fan. And so they started just using little inferences about Rush, and eventually became friends, and that was a whole different story. And with I Love You Man, it was kind of a period we were going through of rebirth after Neil had come back into the band in 2002, and we were doing our first tour in like 5 years. So we just decided that, like an episode from Seinfeld, where Jerry tells George Costanza, if every instinct you have is wrong, the opposite must be right. In those days, in the days before 2002, we used to just say no to things that were out of our comfort zone. And after 2002, we just started saying yes to things that were out of our comfort zone. And I Love You Man was exactly that.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of says it.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I actually went on, I think I was like 17, 18 years old when that film came out. And I was on a first date with someone from college. And I just thought this was some worthless rom-com. And I go along to it just thinking, oh, this girl, I like this girl. I'm going to take her to see this movie. And then you guys come on screen. I was like, what on earth is going on? Like, I did, because this was before before social media was the beast it is now. And I
Yeah.
was not prepared for that. And I couldn't really get across my excitement to her, what was happening.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but no, it was amazing. Yeah, we should yeah, I think bands should do more of those left field things, to be honest. And yeah, I totally get the just saying screw it, let's give it a go. Yeah, it was great,
Yeah.
great.
Sometimes you can just overthink things,
Yeah,
and so from that sort of point forward, if something involved comedy, we were all for it.
totally. Yeah. Lurkst asks, and I'm quite interested in this as well. I have a question regarding the final Rush tour in 2015. How was the mood in the camp, given that Neil wanted to stop performing?
Well, the tour started out in a very good mood, right? Everybody was kind of in the same mood. We were very excited about the show because we put a lot of effort into designing this complex retrospective in reverse, beginning in the modern time and then just going back to the beginning. And it was very theatrical in terms of our stage setup and the way we used our crew and props. And so it was really a lot of fun. And as the tour wound down, I would say the mood started to change into and split into two different camps. As we got closer to the end, Neil was getting happier,
Hmm.
and Alex and I were getting sadder because we really wanted to bring that tour to as many fans around the world as we could. And Neil had just agreed to do sort of 30 shows, and he felt like he was approaching liberation in a sense.
Yeah.
So we were quite divided by the end of that tour.
No, it's a really interesting answer. And I mean, the next question is a very short question, very to the point from Cygnus X5. Are we going to hear new music from you and Alex?
Well, certainly there will be new music from Alex and new music from me. At one point, I can't say.
Yeah.
Will there be new music of us together? I think it's likely.
Awesome. Professor Kaufman asks, on the spirit of radio, you sang, all this machinery making modern music can still be open-hearted, not so coldly charted. It's really just a question of your honesty. What, in your experience, constitutes honest music these days?
Well, I think the audience knows. I like to give credit to the audience that they know when somebody, no matter what style of music they're playing, when that artist means what he says and believes in the music that he's making, as opposed to just going through the motions so he can rake in the dough. I think you can tell that.
Mm.
I don't care how commercial your music is. That's not the issue. The issue is whether you are doing what you believe in doing. And for the three of us, we just set out to write music that made us happy and crossed our fingers there were enough fans out there that had the same musical sensibility. And that worked out for us. So we remained true to ourselves. And yet we were lucky enough to gain a level of success. But I think it's all down to the audience. And I really do believe they can tell when somebody's just bullshitting.
Yeah. It's almost like the audience is a reflection of, the people in front, right?
Yeah, I think they can tell when someone's really playing from the heart.
Yeah. Bone67 says, you have a reputation as a thoroughly amiable chap. I've never seen a bad word written about you. Is this assessment entirely accurate? And who was the last person you told to F off?
Yeah, thank you very much. I like to think I'm a good guy, although somebody jokingly asked me to do a video for one of their friends the other day,
Mm.
and I said, "Hi, fuck you," but that was just that was just kidding around. So
Yeah,
um, I'm I bear a grudge when somebody does me wrong, and there have been some people over the years that have done me wrong. A few of them I outed in my book, but for the most part, I am a very nice Canadian boy. I was brought up properly, so I try not to cast aspersions.
yeah. Smiling Peter asks, there will never be another Neil Peart, but which drummers do you really rate today?
Oh, good God, there's so many of them. I love Danny Carey's playing.
Yeah.
I love Chad Smith's playing. Very different than Neil, but I mean, the man has so much power in his playing. Um, I heard this drummer the other day. Oh, I think her name is Annika. She played on the last Jeff Beck tour, and I thought she was terrific.
Oh,
Uh,
I think she's a Danish lady.
yeah, yeah, I thought
Sure,
she
she's
was.
Scandinavian. Yeah, I can't think of a
I thought she was
surname.
terrific. Yeah. So I don't know. It goes on and on and on. We're living in a time rich with great drummers, and you see some of them are only 7, 8, 9 years old on social
Yeah.
media.
I think this question might need some context for the more casual reader, but I knew what it meant. Did you ever actually wash anything with the washing machines?
No, they were dryers, in fact, and
All right, exactly. Yeah.
and
That
their
was
heating,
all these
their
years I was
heating,
wrong.
yeah, and their heating elements were removed, so it was just a prop. But I can share my favorite dryer story
Yeah,
if
sure.
there's room for that. So I can't remember what year it is. I talk about it in my book, but we used to have guests come out and pretend they were doing their laundry, and they would just walk on stage and ignore the audience. But my favorite moment was with Jack Black. And he came out on stage. It was in Anaheim. And he basically took all his clothes off except for his, tidy whities, and put them in the dryer, and then hopped up on top of it and formed the sign of the man on the star from the cover of the 2112 album, with his pants revealing a bit of his plumber's crack. So
Wow. That's a
yeah.
great anecdote. Eric B asks, can you foresee a follow-up to My Favorite Headache? I suppose that kind of
Well,
is the same question about new music, isn't it?
yeah. Um, it's something I think about a lot. I've been busy with a lot of different projects because um, having played in the same band for, almost 50 years, one way or another, and the way things ended, which was quite sad, I just felt I needed to clear my head and do other things. So, I got involved in writing. I did my big, beautiful book of bass, which I was, which was a very fun and beautiful project to be involved in. And then I delved into my own Effin Life. Uh, and then I got involved in the TV series, which is coming out this fall.
Yes.
So I've been really enjoying doing everything but music.
Yeah.
But I recently discovered a couple of songs that were left off of My Favorite Headache, and listening to those songs really inspired me to want to get back in the studio. So I hope that once I finish this whole book tour thing, that uh, I will have the opportunity to play with Alex, or play on my own, or write some songs. And so I have definitely not finished with music, and I hope music hasn't finished with me.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Richard 2112 asks, while you, Alex, and Neil clearly had a blast, do you have any regrets from your time with Rush?
Yeah, show me someone without regrets, and I'll show you a guy who's full of crap.
Yeah.
Of course, I have regrets. I have regrets about um, mostly personal, about how much time I spent away from my son after he was born years ago. I have regrets about how much time and how I was derelict in my own marriage for so many years because I always put the band first. So those are the kind of regrets I have. I don't have any regrets about the story arc of my time in Rush. I was the luckiest bass player on earth to play with a drummer like Neil Peart and a guitarist like Alex Lifeson. And I was even more blessed because both of them were my dear friends. So I have no regrets in that regard.
I think this next question kind of is a nice one to go straight into. If you had to re-record one album in Rush's back catalogue, which one and why? Like gun to head, if you had to do one.
Yeah. Well, that's a dangerous question.
Yeah.
In my view, I never finished a record I was really totally happy with. So,
Mm,
given the chance to go back in time, of course, there are a number of things I would redo, but um, I think I think that's a fool's errand. So I'm going to say that no, I would not want to redo anything I've done in the past. Let it stand for what it was, warts and
yeah,
all.
absolutely. Shiftertron says, if you like us had the chance to post a question to one of your musical heroes, who would it be and what would you ask?
Great question. Wow. One of the great regrets of my life was that I never got a chance to sit down with Chris Squire and talk to him.
Hmm.
He was such an important, heroic bass player to me. And even though he did come to one Rush gig in London many years ago, uh, it was so crazy backstage, I never got a chance to talk to him. So I would love to sit down with him and find out more about how he developed his style
Yeah.
and what were his biggest influences and what were his priorities as a bass player in a band.
Bruce Vane 1000 says, I've read a lot about you and Kiss getting on really well in your early days of touring, which seems like an unlikely pairing. What was it about them that you connected with, and do your paths still cross at all now?
Well, Kiss were very kind to us, and we were new and really green to the world of touring. And we barely even had proper road cases when we started. But their road crew, even more than the band, their road crew uh, liked us and supported us and taught us. And the guys in the band were just at that point where they were starting to play theaters
Hmm.
and so they were coming into their own. There was not much ego floating around back then. So for us, it was like we had just joined the circus. Watching them on stage every night uh, was really informative in terms of learning how to put on a show. And although their music wasn't necessarily our cup of tea, they were a rock band and they were explosive, literally
Hmm.
explosive. And so the combination of kindness from their people and the professionalism that we were learning about, those were two very, very important steps in bonding us to that time.
Yeah, a lot of very different bands, as you say, but a lot of the same principles. Um, Rockman Alive asks, how did you come up with the idea for the incredible polyrhythm in the intro to Spirit of Radio?
Well, that was one of those songs that the three of us wrote all together in a rehearsal studio. So I think Alex came up with this riff, that crazy riff that starts the song off. And Neil and I started talking about how we can kind of contrapuntally break into that riff. So we had this circular riff that Alex is playing, and we just wanted to be as jarring and unusual as we could before we settled into kind of that typical rock and roll riff that is that song. And it was supposed to be the embodiment. That song was supposed to be the embodiment of as many different styles as we could muster in order to show the variety of music that's available on your radio dial. So that's how that all came together.
No, it's a great answer. I have to say as well, I think it's probably my favorite, like 4 minutes of drumming, like in
Oh, great.
history.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you.
I mean, I was a drummer as well back in, not so much now, but I was, and yeah, same with Danny Carey as well. Just to even be like a quarter of as good as that, like Neil would be,
Yeah,
just inhuman. David
absolutely.
asks, hey Geddy, are there any biographies you've read, music based or otherwise, that inspired you to tell your own story?
The fact is, I haven't really read that many memoir in years and years and years. In the 70s and 80s, I was reading a lot of books uh, about film directors because that was my real interest back then. But it's been a while since I have read a memoir. So when I approached this one, I was really coming at it from a very fresh point of view. But I did make sure that my co-writer, Daniel Richler, read every effing memoir that was out there on the market. So he would be well versed and a really good sounding board for me.
Yeah. Okay. Hairpied says you have talked about being a collector, baseball memorabilia, wine, bass guitars. What is the latest rabbit hole that you've fallen into, if there is one?
Thank you for pointing out my illness. And collecting is a disease, not to belittle actual diseases, but uh, collecting, there's a fine line between collecting and being obsessively greedy. But my latest rabbit hole is one of vintage watches,
Hmm.
vintage wristwatches, and I have fallen way down deep that rabbit hole. So
How did
I'm
you?
having a lot of fun. Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to ask what sort of like led you towards that?
I'm sorry. I didn't hunt.
What led you towards your first vintage watch? Did you?
Okay. What happened was, I had an old Rolex that I bought years and years ago, and I pretty much wore it all the time. And then I was visiting a friend in Zurich, and he took me into this little shop, and I started looking at these vintage watches in wonderful condition. And I don't know, something just clicked in my brain, and they just looked so fascinating. And I was fascinated mostly by the late 60s period
Yeah.
and the style of the watches then. So I bought a couple of small pieces and brought them home. And then inevitably, what happens with me, I start reading about the company, I start reading about the period, I start reading about those that were designing in that period. And before I know it, I'm down this rabbit hole.
Okay. Um, Platypus asks, Neil sometimes said he felt the fans' huge expectations are stressful, that he had to perfect every night, had to be perfect every night in order to not let them down. Did you also feel that way about your playing when you went on stage?
I would say, yeah, I would say that the three of us always believed that every member of the audience could hear every clam that
Mm,
came off our fingerboard, that we couldn't fool them.
yeah,
So we had to be on our toes. We had to play our best, or they would know. And that was embarrassing. We wanted to surprise them, and we wanted to obviously reproduce our songs as accurately as possible.
yeah.
So yeah, I think we all three had the same attitude in that regard.
And the next question is kind of related as well. This from Mr. Chan. He asks, what is the most challenging part of keeping interest and energy when playing songs hundreds, if not thousands of times over 5 decades?
That's a really good question. So it's hard to maintain your interest when you're playing one song over and over and over again. So what we used to do, what I used to do, I would start improvising in subtle ways. Maybe I would change the way I'm singing a particular line, or I would add a couple of extra notes, or I would start to overcomplicate small moments in my bass riff. And then Neil would pick up on that, and then he would feed back with a little overcomplication of his own. Just throw in these little nuances that would keep us interested and feel like, wow, it's a whole new part.
Yeah. R.D. Miller asks, this is a very non-music related question, but he asks, should there be limits on AI technology?
Well, that's really a good question, and it's a big question, and I don't know if I'm knowledgeable enough to understand what those limits could possibly be, but I think there has to be, there's an expression that Thomas Edison, who not my favorite human being, but he was a brilliant man, and he said, what man's mind can conceive, man's character must control. And I think that's appropriate here.
Yeah.
Because it's in the early days, I think AI is going to be low-hanging fruit, and people are going to be able to make hay and suddenly make art or music using AI to get them what they want. But that doesn't necessarily mean those people will have taste or character. And I think that's always got to be the deciding line when using new technology.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, there's obviously a huge discourse around it now, and we keep hearing about, new frontiers with the tech, but I would love to see like a manifesto or some clear goals with regards to what we're trying to achieve with it.
Yeah, it would be nice if the world can agree on a set of standards.
Yeah.
And a set of limitations. I agree, that would be nice, but getting the world to agree on anything seems
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Got a couple of questions left. Newfoundlander says, I'm an admirer of your commitment to staying in Toronto. Did you ever consider living elsewhere?
Yes, I have considered living elsewhere. I do spend a lot of time in the UK. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to a magazine from the UK.
London, right?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in London, and not just London. My wife and I spend a lot of time walking the depth and breadth of the United Kingdom. We recently just finished a 10-day walking trip through Cornwall and to the Isles of Scilly.
Wow.
So we love it there, but for the longest time, my mom was still around, and she lived here, and I wanted to be around close to her. And now I have a grandson who lives here, and I want to be around close to him. So as much as I'd like to just spend most of my time wandering the face of the earth, I have family, and that's important to me, and they live in Toronto, so I'll stay here.
Yeah. So the last question, this is one that made me laugh actually when I read it. As the story goes, I think this is a gentleman from Manchester in the UK. He says, as the story goes, I'm named Richard Geddy after my mum saw my dad with long hair like yours at a rock bar, fancied him, and the rest is history. Have you heard of any? Have you heard of any of the people around the world named after you?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I have. And I'm always embarrassed when someone comes up to me and introduces me to their young child, Geddy. I'm more used to people naming their dogs Geddy, but that seems a little easier to take without embarrassment. But yeah, it's got to be the ultimate compliment, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I try to take it in that way. And so I hope your middle name of Geddy has not been a burden for you.
Yeah, that's the last question I had from the Guardian readers. We've actually got, and I'm lucky enough to speak to you twice this week, doing something more around the book for
Great.
Reader's Digest in a few days' time. So I wanted to get more into the book ahead of your tour, and got lots to ask about that. So amazing. Yeah, thanks for your time, Geddy, and have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks. Speak to you later in the week then.
Talk to you later. Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.